Hello Internet! I'm finally making another video. I just want to say a quick thanks for everyone who subscribed and commented on the last one. You know, it's been a little bit. Hopefully I'm going to be pushing more of these out fairly soon. But in today's, I'm going to be giving you a few tips and tricks on how to use acrylic inks to make tabletop level painting a little bit faster in regards to these specific Necrons or any other Necrons you got for both panel lining and also plasma effect. So without any further ado, let's get started.
Hey, check it out! I figured out how to use voiceover on the software. Anyway, so these are the Necrons I'm working on currently as part of the commission. These are a custom dynasty, the primary color being that Retributor Armour, secondary being the turquoise ink, and then those dull metallics are actually just Retributor Armour again, dry brushed over black. So in this video we'll be talking primarily about those turquoise areas and how I've been using inks to make my life a little bit easier on this tabletop level painting. So now we're going to talk about the colors we're using in this video. I've got 3 Citadel colors and 2 inks. First being White Scar, which is just a white, Sotek Green, which is actually a darker turquoise, and Ariman Blue, which is kind of a lighter blue turquoise. Now on the ink side we have Liquitex Acrylic Titanium White. I don't get hung up on the brand there, it's titanium white ink. And then the Daler Roundy Turquoise is the one we're going to be using the most here. I want to point out a couple things about this turquoise. You'll see me shake it up here in the video, and that's because you need to keep it well mixed. Now, this ink is actually made up of 3 different pigments that make the color. That's what I'm pointing to right there. That shows the actual technical pigments used. So it's easy for them, especially in that very liquid medium, to separate out. You'll see that later in the video itself. And then the second thing is, looking at that square, that means it's going to be at like a semi-opaque, semi-transparent coverage. It's not going to cover quite as well as your normal acrylic ink will. And we're actually going to use that slightly to our advantage when painting those vents. But you can see even in the bottom and the top, those pigments don't always mix up well. So it's very important to keep it mixed. I usually use like my vortex mixer before using it at all. Alright, so now we're going to show you how easy the ink makes panel lining. So I'm going to put a little bit on my wet palette. I'm going to get my brush wet before putting it into the ink because I don't want the capillary action sucking up the ink into the ferrule. And then I'm just going to take the brush, add a little bit of ink to it, and just guide that brush into those little tiny recessed lines. And as you'll see, the ink flows off the brush very well. It flows directly into those crevices, and it makes this painting just much easier than it would be with traditional paints that will just like stick to wherever you touch the brush, because that ink will actually flow into those recesses. You may want to make sure that the brush kind of touches the sides a little bit because the ink will stick to the sides. And if you can see that little dot I'm about to paint, now I actually have to come over that twice with the ink because the ink gets sucked to the sides away from the center. So I'll wait for that to dry. But very easy compared to normal paints. And in fact, if you make a mistake, I'll make a mistake here in a minute, you can actually take your thumb, finger, wipe it away pretty quickly just because it's so slow to dry. So yeah, it's very easy to correct as well as long as you come in pretty quick. But painting this kind of stuff with traditional paints is kind of a pain, but with inks it's a lot easier just because of that flow. Now, you could probably get a similar result if you used a lot of flow improver. This is just another way of going after it. Now the other thing about this, as I mentioned with that dot, since I had to paint that twice, the ink will stick to the sides of whatever you're painting, you know, those recessed areas a little bit. So when we go over to the vents in a minute, you're going to see how we can get over that. I'm going to show you first how it looks if you just use the ink straight, and then a trick that you can do to kind of give it those vents a glow. And then again, see, I'm going over that twice and now it's very well covered, that little dot. You can't see any of the base coat underneath. So since the vents are a slightly bigger area, they're going to take a little bit more. So I'm going to paint here with the ink, and you're going to see, because of all that I described earlier, you're going to have a little section in the middle of that vent that's not going to have any ink covering it. So it looks a little bit weird, right? Because you got the blue ink on the sides, but then you still have like the dark black in the middle. So in a second I'll show you how we're going to overcome that and make it look like it has a good glow effect. So to solve this problem, what I've done is I've taken that white scar, or really any white paint that works well enough, and I'm going to take the white scar into my brush, and in each one of those vents, I'm just going to paint basically a white line down the center of it. Now this line doesn't need to be like super neat. It doesn't need to actually touch the sides of the vent, so it's going to be a lot easier to paint. You know, you don't have to worry about it getting the entire thing filled. You just need the center of each one of those little tiny vents to be pretty solidly white. And of course the reason for this is that once you come in later with that blue ink, as I'll show you in a second, that way you have the blue ink sticking to the sides, but since it's semi-opaque only, it's partially transparent, it'll actually blend pretty well on the outskirts of that white line you're painting and make a pretty convincing glow effect that again is fairly easy to do, and it's easy not to mess up. So as you see, I'll do a couple of quick paints of the white on each, and then I'll come in a minute and just finish that out with more of that blue ink. Alright, so here we have the white painted down each one of those vents, and now I'm going to come back in with the turquoise ink and finish that effect. Before I do that, because again this ink tends to separate out its three different pigments in that liquid medium, I'm just going to take a second with a brush and then stir up the ink on the palette itself. You can see here it's a little bit mottled, it doesn't have that uniform color. But as I stir it, it just goes back, you know, all those pigments mix up within the medium, and you get that more uniform turquoise color that you started with. So I take that, I get a little bit ink on the brush, and again, I just take my brush, guide it into those edges. As soon as the camera is refocused, there we go. Guide it along those edges, and the ink flows, it sticks to those edges, and it makes painting in those crevices super easy. And so with that white, you get a much more convincing glow effect. So you've got, you know, the white where the energy is centered, primarily flowing out of, and the edges, as the light travels out, becomes much more colored. You'll see me here in a second. I'll just take the top of the brush and tap along the top of each one of those where the ink didn't quite stick to the first part. But again, takes seconds really, and it's a lot easier and a lot cleaner than doing that with the traditional acrylics. Here's the final effect while dry. So you can see in that leftmost vent that since we didn't put the white down first, that it has that dark center still, and it doesn't quite look right. But those remaining three vents where we did put the white down first gives you a pretty good, pretty convincing glow effect, especially for the level of painting we're doing here, the very basic tabletop, and again, very fast compared to other methods. Next we're doing the plasma glow. So on my palette right now, I've got the Liquitex white ink, I've got the Ahriman blue, and then I've got the Sotek green. And those are the only things we're going to need for the actual plasma. So to start with, I'm just going to do the standard 2 thin coats of the Ahriman blue on all the plasma coils. I'm just going to coat them entirely. I'm going to show you this coat, but I'm not going to show you the second coat just because it's the exact same thing. You just want to know that you want all those plasma coils and the background in there to be completely coated in Ahriman blue. Easy enough. Okay, now that the two thin coats are done and dry, make sure they're dry first. We're going to take a little bit of Liquitex white ink, load up our brush, and what we're doing here is we're trying to get the ink basically in between the coils and alongside the bottom of those coils. But primarily you're going to get that ink in between the little tiny gaps in the plasma coils themselves. Now, since this takes a hot minute to dry, you can play around with it. If the ink doesn't get where you want it to, you can add a little bit more, try and suck a little bit away with like a dry brush, which is what I'm doing right there. But really just primarily get it down in between those coils. If you get a little bit mixed in with the bottom of the plasma coils and end up with lighter blue there, no problem whatsoever. It looks fine. And then you're going to do the same thing on the bottom of those plasma coils. Again, you're putting the ink more towards where the energy is generated out of in theory. So you're getting it towards like the middle of the plasma coils themselves. You can see I take a second. You can move the ink around, but that's where I'm going to end up with the white ink itself. Alright, so give the ink an extra little bit to dry. It'll dry a little bit slower than your typical acrylics. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come in with that Sotek green, and you're going to add contrast towards the top of those plasma coils, farthest away from where the energy is coming out of. So using basically the side of your brush, you're going to brush up and away from where that white is, and just hit basically the coils themselves. You don't want the Sotek green to actually get in between the coils, but you're going to take it and brush away from where that white is and hit the tips of those coils to make them a little bit darker, farther away from where the energy is theoretically getting generated. And that's the entire effect. If you want, if you mess up, you can come in and refine it. You can add more of the original blue, you can add more white ink. Super easy to do. I'll show you here in a second what it looks like with the rest of the gun painted, or at least part of the gun around it, just so you get a better sense of the effect. Alright, so here we are. I just added some quick metallic and a little bit of Nuln Oil, and you can see the plasma effect as it is. So again, we're not looking for anything super fancy here. This is not going to be winning golden demons, but it's a very quick way of adding a nice plasma glow to your Necrons. Hey, so thanks for tuning in and watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to. I wanted to end this video showing you some of the other things I've got on the table right now. So I've also been working with kind of a Synthwave project. So this is the initial crop of bases I've done. I've already learned a few things that the second batch will actually look a little bit better, but it would be easy enough to put together a video of that if anyone is actually interested. So those are the bases, and then I will show you the Eldar that they're going to. So again, Synthwave colors. This is early on. I've just put the base coats down, but again, I've been considering putting out a video on how to do like Synthwave Eldar. So if you want to watch that, comment down below, let me know, and I will put something together in the near future. Otherwise, take care, have a good day, night, evening, wherever you are, and keep painting.